So, hi everybody, this is Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to begin a new topic of discussion, and that topic is regret. So where does regret live on the change grid? How does regret come to be a word that's describing a set of feelings or responses to something, what triggered it? How do we deal with it, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just going to see, does regret have a particular place on the change grid? Could it be experienced anywhere and everywhere? Or what's the deal with regret? Now, I'll tell you what got this topic going was today I was heading to the gym and I started listening to NPR. Now, you have to understand we could walk to the gym, so it's not like you get a whole lot of time to listen to much of anything. And I heard the tail end of an interview of somebody who I believe was part of, let's see if I can remember what university he was part of. I think Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern, but he studies regret. And he was talking a little bit about how people misunderstand regret, that people think they should try to live their life without any regrets. They were quoting Edith Piaf's song, Non, je ne regrette rien, so I regret nothing in life, I have no regrets. And he was talking about how to try to live that life would be very productive for a human, that there's benefit to regret. And he said something very interesting that made me want to use it as a quick topic for today. He said that once you get to a level of awareness about what your regrets are, you will simultaneously learn what your values are. And so I thought that's very interesting. What is the relationship between regret and value as we bestow upon certain things in life? So before we get into what I want to look at the change grid, let me start by asking all of you guys, have you had any background studies? Have you done much work in the field of regret? Boris, Kathy, yeah.
I've coached on it. I haven't studied it per se, other than looking at it from a spiritual perspective and realizing that it really, I have experienced regret at a lot of different points in my life, but from a spiritual perspective, realize that it is not, it's not valuable from the standpoint going forward, because you've done what you've done for a reason, and
Yeah,
that's
it's right, because it's inherently backwards looking.
yeah,
I
yeah.
can't regret something that didn't happen yet. So yeah, it's one of these evaluation sorts of things that happen after the fact. And it triggered a lot of interesting thoughts around recent regrets versus lifelong regrets, or uh, regretting now later in life something that you had not regretted up until then but happened way earlier in life. So I thought it was really interesting to kind of look at, how does that dynamic work? Is that dynamic of benefit? If so, what's the benefit, etc. So I thought we could have a little bit of fun with it. So any other thoughts? Anything else anyone wants to share
See,
before
I
I?
think you can regret not doing something.
I think that's the whole point of regret. Do I regret that I did it, or do I regret that I didn't do it? And
Right.
that's one of the things I wanted to bring up. In fact, David, hold that thought. I'm going to show the definition, and then I think you're going to see what I kind of went like, that can't be it. Now, this definition came out of a quick article I found on Psychology Today that's 10 years old. So consider the source, consider the time, but this is the definition of regret they were using from this study that they'd been doing. But regret is a negative cognitive or emotional state that involves blaming ourselves for a bad outcome, feeling a sense of loss or sorrow at what might have been, or wishing we could undo a previous choice that we made. Now, interestingly enough, if I took each one of those three pieces, I would say we have another word that we use in our language to describe that situation more specifically. So that blaming ourselves for a bad outcome, if you blame yourself for a bad outcome, what is that emotion? You're blaming yourself because something didn't turn out the way it coulda, shoulda, woulda. Anybody? Okay, I'll say, I think that's guilt. When you're blaming ourselves for a bad outcome, is that coming from guilt? And yeah, maybe there's a relationship between guilt and regret. I feel badly that I did it. I wish I hadn't done it, or I wish I had have done something different. Maybe that whole idea about wishing is also part of where regret comes into play. But nevertheless, I would think the primary emotion I'm feeling there is guilt. And when I look at feeling a sense of loss or sorrow at what might have been, well, the front end of that, feeling a sense of loss or sorrow, to me is what grief is. But when you add that at what might have been, well, that means I'm regretting what didn't happen instead of regretting what did happen. So I think this one's getting closer. A sense of loss or sorrow at what might have been. Interesting. Or wishing we could undo a previous choice that we made. Now that also to me feels like it's a little bit more of guilt. It is more of a self-reflection, but I can see where regret might come in there as well. So anyone's thoughts about how regret is defined or how you might define it when you're working with clients?
I can see it all over the change grid.
Interesting. That's what we're going to look at. That'll be interesting to see. Yeah.
I feel like those second two clauses reflect more of what I see as regret. I wish I didn't.
I wish I
I
did.
wish I did.
Right.
That to me is a regret thing.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And Chris, did you want to share something? I saw you unmuted there for a jiffy. All right, well, you feel free. So yeah, as I started thinking about this definition of regret, I started thinking about, all right, I'm about to be 65. So it's one of those milestone birthdays where, maybe it's just me, but you sit and you reflect on, are you where you wanted to be when you were 65? What was the course that ended up leading me to where I am? And what of that course of action and lifetime am I very happy with? And what might I regret? And isn't that interesting? Because I look back and I go, well, everything turned out quite well. If I had done anything differently, I may have ended up in a very different place. I don't know if it would have been good, bad, better, worse, whatever. But I do know that every decision you make in life, every choice you make, every action you take is going to set into motion its own future. So if you had elected to have a different thought that led to a different behavior, then you may very well end up someplace else. So all I know for certain is that I am living proof that the decisions that I made brought me to where I am today. So it's kind of a weird exercise in going back, like, what is the point of looking back for regret? Seeing what do you regret? And I'm just babbling for a minute, but I want to give you guys some thoughts to chew on. Does regret sometimes tell me that there's still time? Like, for example, I would say that I regret not taking my bodybuilding more seriously earlier in life, because I can think of many times, I wish I had done this sooner. I wish I had stayed with it longer. I wish ... So I can look back and say, well, that would have been something that in retrospect, I would have liked to have started on earlier, but I'm still in a great place and fine, I'm doing it now. So is regret part of the engine of creating a bucket list? What can you go back and redo, undo, or doodly do? I mean, what is it? What is it?
I don't think the bucket list is necessarily only regret.
I agree. A lot of it could be brand new stuff. So,
but regret would fold in.
Yeah, it would, I look back at life and go, all right, I'm 65. That's not particularly old by today's life expectancies, but it's certainly a milestone in life. I mean, I'm about to be receiving Medicare. So how exciting is that? Although I wish they'd stop calling me, asking me to buy whatever their Advantage program is.
That doesn't stop for years.
So I hear, yeah. So it's like, oh, people. Um, so anyway, yeah. So I'm just trying to figure out where does regret really come from? Is regret purely negative, as it's been framed here? It's a negative cognitive or emotional state. I don't necessarily believe that it's negative. How come it
I
can't
would
be?
comment here. I'm just jumping in. I'm sorry. I would just comment here. I don't think most things are purely negative or purely positive. I think that regret can be used in a positive way. It can be used as a jumping off point. It can be used as a trigger, as a launching pad for doing something differently. So it doesn't have to be. It can be a reminder. Um, so from that standpoint, I don't see it as in any way purely negative. It can feel bad at the moment, but that doesn't mean it's like tension.
Right.
It creates a kind of tension, and the tension can trigger positive. It can trigger action. It can trigger, a whole range of different things. So that's where I come out on it.
Right. Okay.
What, and isn't it really kind of a feedback? I remember Psychology Today having an article, God, 30 years ago, saying that the words, it is with deep regret that if you wanted someone to accept your apology, those were the words they used. And so I think it's almost a feedback, maybe to make an apology or something, that rather than labeling it positive or negative, kind of like Kathy was saying, that it's information that allows you to take the next step. The reason I'm late for the call, I was talking to a client, 52 years old. Is it too late to be a pilot? So the question is, I told her to keep asking the question, is this the right dream for me today? So then the question is, will I regret it if I don't? So isn't it also a value assessment
Well,
of what,
yeah, that's what got this all going, because on the drive to the gym, I heard on NPR this guy who's a professor, and he focuses entirely on the psychology of regret. And he said that when you list your biggest regrets, you're also listing your greatest values.
Exactly.
And so I thought that was fascinating, which is why I wanted to kind of take a look at it and see where we end up going with it. All right, so let me go ahead, and I'm going to slide the article in. And if you guys want, I'll just go ahead and type. No, forget typing. We don't need to type anymore, people. We can just dictate. Let me chat this over to everybody. And again, I just did a quick Google search, so don't think for one moment that this is something that has been very carefully studied and vetted and all that. I just like to find something that's intended more for the lay public whenever I'm exploring into these sort of concepts. So there you go. Now, I have no idea who Melanie Greenberg is, but thank you, Melanie, for taking the time to write this article. Good for you. You got published by Psychology Today. So what is regret? We talked about that definition. It's where I got it from. She's talking a little bit about, do men and women differ in the things they regret? Apparently there are some studies. We can look deeper at some of the stuff. There's a part later on I just want to get to. Are there cultural differences? Do people experience more regret when they look back over long periods of time? Well, as I said, I think you can only regret when you look back, or as Edie just illustrated, if you ask someone to put themselves in the position of looking back. So it hasn't happened yet, but it might help someone make a better decision if they do also factor in regrets of not doing something, or regrets of doing it for that matter, depending on what the situation is. So there's that. Is there any value in regret? Researcher, oh, this is the guy who was being interviewed. Neil Roos of the Kellogg School of Management, Northwestern University, is a leader in the field of regret research. His studies of younger people have shown that regret was rated more favorably than unfavorably, primarily because of its informational value in motivating corrective action. Interestingly, regret was rated highest of a list of negative emotions in fulfilling 5 functions. So this is a positive thing. So less of negative emotions, but these emotions fulfill 5 functions. I like that. helps us to make sense of the world. We'd have to explore that. Avoid future negative behaviors. Oh, so learning from the mistake so you don't do it again. Gaining insight. I feel values coming in there. Achieving social harmony. That's more about like correcting faux pas, things like that. Improving ability to approach desired opportunities, presumably because we regret past positivity. Wow, someone say that. Presumably because we regret past passivity. All right, fine. A little bit of that starts to teeter on shame. So does regret have long-term effects on well-being? What is the cognitive basis of regret? Can advertisers harness the power of regret?
Oh, there you go.
There you go. Exactly right. Because you're going to miss out. You could have had a V8. That's right there. I could have had a V8. Right. What can we do to cope with regret? And then this gets a little bit to, what we can actually do in our role as human development professionals. But I'm, at this point anyway, more curious to know about where it comes from. So we can do a deeper dive on this, but this is the part I wanted to look at. What is the cognitive basis of regret? So let's just read these two paragraphs, and then I want to go to the change grid, and we can see if it's helped us identify any particular region. So regret can also stem from counterfactual thinking. In other words, the easier it is to envision a different outcome, the more likely we are to regret the lost opportunity. Okay, digest that for a minute. So somehow or another, I've performed an evaluative process. If I can envision a different outcome than the one that I actually had, I'm more likely to regret the lost opportunity. Okay, fine. The Harvard newsletter tells the story of a man in Liverpool who always chose the same set of lottery numbers. One time, however, he forgot to buy a ticket and his numbers came up. Okay, so
There's regret.
That's real regret. That's real regret. It's also shame, embarrassment. I mean, regret doesn't even seem like how I would feel in that moment. I don't know that regret would be the front, emotion I was experiencing.
No, I think a word that starts with the letter P would be a little bit more.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of anger that would probably come up first. And then, the world is filled with rocks and regrets and coulda, shoulda, wouldas and all that sort of stuff. So, but I would believe, yeah, it would take me a while to get past that. All right. So according to the story, the poor man was so full of self-recrimination and regret that he committed suicide. Oh my goodness. Okay. Coming that close to a life of riches and then not getting it because of his own inaction was perhaps too much to bear. Interestingly, career mistakes are frequent sources of regret in research studies, perhaps because of opportunities that people come close to but miss. All right, so I think this is interesting that it's giving us this focus on looking towards the past for doing something. So that kind of brought up a question about where does this end up falling on the change grid. So for you to regret a situation, what's going on in your head? What is the actual activity?
If I can comment here, what
Yes.
strikes me about this, particularly as it relates to the change grid, is with regret, you know that you had the ability to do it, or you wouldn't be regretting it.
Tell us more about that.
This is, I mean, again, I haven't thought this through, but this is what struck me, as I think about the change grid. If I don't regret doing something that I never just wouldn't have known how to do to begin with. I don't regret never becoming a nuclear physicist.
Oh yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? I mean,
it was never in your values to begin with.
Yeah, but I might regret not taking a path that I look back on that said I really could have knocked the ball out of the park with that particular thing. and I chose a different path for whatever reason I had. And if I look at myself now and say, I wish, or whatever, that to me is regret. It implies that I had the ability, it was within my grasp at some point.
But Kathy, it's beyond ability, because you have the potential to do a lot of things. Then it goes back to, what did you desire, want, and value?
I agree.
Right?
It's not just ability. I know. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying that ability plays a role in it. Is what
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? And I think men and women may vary. And I think, it's almost like you can't, Ukraine, COVID, you can't change that, but we do have the choice on how we react to it. I'm just thinking, when I bought all those properties at the beach and lost everything, there's another guy that got taken by Fred Haler, and he committed suicide. And so when I look at regret, do I regret trusting these people? Yeah. Do I move on, and do I learn from it? So isn't, again, that we have a choice on how we deal with it. Now, I think men associate being more of a fool when they are fooled by someone and taken. And it hit his ego so badly that there were people committing suicide by being a fool to this guy. I looked at it as, oh, it was a big mistake. I got to move on. What can I do now? So isn't it a lot in that choice in how we, okay.
Yeah. And there is a section of this little article, if you guys, when you take your time to read it, that talks specifically about some differences between men and women. And I seem to remember the one is that women tend to look back over life and regret things regarding to relationships. And men have a tendency to look back over life and regret more about experiences. So they did something or they didn't do something, and the women is that they had the relationship or they didn't have the relationship or something like that. I thought, well,
and don't you think, Key, that men do identify that's changing with work, financial success and work? Yeah, that's part of.
Yep. Nope, I agree. Yeah, I think it's a unique kind of thing. But going to the point Kathy was kind of illustrating is, when someone believes they have a high ability to do something, and here's the thing, they have to believe that they had adequate ability at the time the decision was made. They can't say like, well, I really regret doing that in 1980 because in 1990 I learned blah, blah, blah. I mean, you made the best decision you could at the point in time based on the information you had available to you. So is it fair to even apply regret when you didn't possess the ability at the time to have made the decision you now deem right? So
no, I think that's a key. That's a key factor.
Yeah.
Knew you had the ability at the time to do it. Yeah.
Right. Because we all know 20/20 hindsight, everyone has 20/20 hindsight, or, we have to go back and say, based on the ability that I perceived myself as having at the time I made that decision, did I do the right thing or the wrong thing? And did I even own that filter at the time I made that decision? I don't think any of us knowingly or willingly did the wrong thing, deliberately did the wrong thing. At the time we did it, we probably felt like it was a positive, we did what we needed to do under the circumstances, or we took advantage of the opportunity as it was revealed itself to us. If I'm applying modern insights, personal insights, to historical issues, that's not of any real, value, other than maybe I learned from it in retrospect. But okay, so Edie, you shared it, so I'll ask you this. And so fine, you invested in a bunch of properties, you were taken advantage of by a con guy. Perhaps the reason why you don't regret it is because at the time that you made the decision, everything not only seemed to be good to move forward, but the information available to you at that time told you that it was okay to move forward Is that accurate?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. And so how can we look back and regret something? I mean, I can regret that it happened to me, but there was nothing that I really could have done. I made the best quality decision I could based on the information available to me at that time. Later on in life, you discover that that decision was good, bad, right, wrong, indifferent, whatever. And but does that mean we regret it? Hmm. I don't know. I
And
don't
that's where I think you can learn from it, or you can
Right.
stay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, there's benefit in going like, oh, like now maybe you know some things to look for in investment sorts of things that at the time didn't appear to be a flag, but now that you've learned what you've learned since that
Right.
experience, maybe you go like, there were flags there. I just wasn't cued into them at the time.
Hmm.
So now I would imagine though, and Kathy, if this is your scenario, so you feel free to chime in with the rest of it, but it's probably, we tend to regret things that were more challenging than less challenging. I don't even know if I agree with what I just said, but let's assume for a second that the situation was one of great challenge. You felt you had great ability. The challenge was also great. That puts you out here in a driver thing. You took action, you moved forward, and then what happened? So, so I know it's not a personal story, Kathy, but if you go,
Yeah, no, well, let me just make sure I agree with the challenge piece. I think that's generally probably true. Um, I think what would happen with the regret is you make a choice between two viable options. Let's say, you make a choice. It's about making a choice
Mhm.
between a couple of viable options, and you choose one based on what you're thinking and feeling at the time, and then life changes. Things change, you change. And so even though you did what you thought was the best thing at the time, see, I don't think that doesn't eliminate regret. I think that you could say, yeah, this feels right, but it's close.
Yeah.
This was a close choice.
Yep.
Um, uh, and then life changes, things happen, and you look back and you say, wow, I could have done that. And it's not about, beating yourself up necessarily, but just this sense of loss. And it goes back to that. And so I'm just kind of, think different scenarios in my own life are floating through
Right.
me right.
And see, that's, I think, because we could kind of move around on the change grid and say, well, there's a situation there that I may use the word regret to partially describe what was going on. And I might do it up here too, but is there a better word, or what's really going on? What's the regret about?
Yeah.
So I do think your point that you were making initially was that if you had multiple ways you could have gone based on the ability you perceived yourself as having at the time,
Yes.
and you were at a 50-50 possibility, you chose the losing half, not the winning half, you might say, I regret not going the other way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But that to me does not feel like the kind of regret that I'm going to, lose sleep over. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, it depends on your personality.
And it doesn't well, I'll
But
tell you why it's coming from that, because you guys know that Linda and I are part of a French club, and French club is on Thursdays. Well, the word regret actually comes from French, from old
yeah.
French, I'm sure, but the verb would be regretter, which means to lament something. So to really cry and weep over something being gone. So regret is considered to be a heightened level of grief. So, and I think we would probably put in normal usage, we would say regret and grief are, grief is going to feel far worse than regret does, but regret includes an element of guilt.
Well,
So,
I would agree. I think it includes those things. I think that in je regrette, it
right.
is about loss of some kind.
Yeah.
And so what I'm saying is that somewhere in there, to a greater or lesser degree, depending on what scale you want to use, it could be a low, small loss, big loss.
Yeah.
There is that sense, there's the sense of having had the ability to do something, and then a sense of loss about not having done it.
So maybe for the fun of a discussion, what if we change the label on the upper axis from perceived challenge to perceived loss?
Or perceived opportunity, even.
Well, yeah. So that's interesting because you're right. Right here in power stress is where I'd find the opportunity.
For me, it's about opportunity. It's about lost opportunity. I mean,
Yeah.
if I'm not bringing in guilt, if I'm not bringing in grief to a great extent, to me, it's about lost opportunity for something you could have done that later in some period of time, you think that really would have been a nice thing to have done, that kind of thing.
Right. That goes back to, I forget which of the speakers on the circuit talks about coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Yeah.
So that's the coulda, shoulda, woulda is about the opportunities. And that would mean that I did not do something that I could have done, should have done, would have done. Again, don't know what stopped me, but nevertheless, something stopped me and I didn't do it. Well, what about the regret that comes from doing something that you wish you'd never done? Is that now more about guilt? Is that more about shame?
I think that depends on its impact.
Yeah.
Did you hurt somebody?
Right.
What kind of effect did it have? Did it hurt anyone but you?
Yeah.
So that, I mean, I don't have anything else to say about that right now, but that's to me, that's measured by the impact.
Right. And so let me give you guys a little scenario that got triggered when Kathy was sharing. Like most families in the world, or in the US for sure, we had a family member who suffered a very minor injury for which the doctor prescribed OxyContin as the pain medication. And no surprise, the individual became very addicted to Oxy and had ended up in very clever, clandestine sorts of ways, burned through all of the family's resources. The business, the mortgage payments didn't get paid, foreclosure going on and on and on and on. So you can imagine the worst case scenario, aside from someone losing their life, that was going on. Well, now he's clean. And now he can look back over his life and what he did, and he can see the negative impact that his behavior actually had on his family and his finances and everything around there. So a divorce happened and loss of access to the child, on and on and on and on and on. So that's when I'm kind of going like, well, I know that he deeply regrets doing what he did. But at the same time, I know he didn't do it deliberately. He didn't do it consciously. I don't think there was never a moment that someone said, I'm going to get addicted to pain pills, And so I wonder, is that really guilt? Or scratch that, is that really regret? Because is it fair for him to take ownership of something that at least the researchers would say after a dose or two of that narcotic, it takes over. You become kind of enslaved by it, and it takes a lot to get past it. So I can understand feeling guilt, and I can understand feeling some shame. I can understand feeling some anger about that. But to me, to regret something over which you had no control doesn't exactly feel legit to me. Don't mind, someone's trying to sell me Medicare Advantage. So what do you guys think about that? I'm sure you have similar stories in your own circle of family and friends, but is that really regret?
But T, isn't it just a matter like my stupidity? Did I have any control over this? Yeah, I had a choice with the information, with my naivete, choosing to trust. Ultimately, I have to take some responsibility for that.
Yeah.
With the OxyContin, I see it the same way. Ultimately, at some point there is a choice where some continue down the path, some will catch it sooner.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I don't, isn't it just whenever we wish we hadn't done something that, and then there's the perception. And I'm thinking one time I was speaking in Raleigh and I said something about Fayetteville, and you lived in North Carolina.
Yep.
It used to be at least the armpit of the state.
Yeah.
And I made a joke about it. It was a Lily Tomlin joke, and it did not go over. And there were people from the chamber from Fayetteville. And they wrote a letter to me and said, "May you fall on the swords you throw." It was the most scathing letter.
Wow.
So here, yeah. I remember my face breaking. I have never, and do I regret saying it? But Lily Tomlin got away with it all the time. But I hit too close to home. I have to take some responsibility.
Yeah.
But it was their perception. I regret saying it because their perception of it, a lot of people thought it was funny, but one person thought I was throwing swords. So where do we call it? You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, that's exactly it. But I think that even what we've been talking about so far on the subject is useful in the work that we're doing with clients, because if they're using the word regret to describe something they're feeling, we can't just assume that we know where that's coming from. We know what it's all about. I need to know more of the backstory, because while regret is one of the words that you are using, I would wonder if you are also experiencing some degree of embarrassment, like you felt like you committed some sort of a social faux pas. Was there some sort of guilt or shame, or you know what? Is regret the sum total of what it is that you were feeling there? Does that as a question?
Yeah, and for me, I'd have to say it's the sum total. In that situation, it would be the sum total. Now, a lost opportunity, I don't think there's always the guilt, the shame, but there's a regret. It was a decision not made as you might again have chosen. So isn't it always?
Yeah, so you're saying you didn't get invited to the Fayetteville chamber to do Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, in that case, it would have been a sum total.
Yeah. So I was just curious about that. Is it just a word we happen to be using, or does that word regret contain something that distinguishes it? And Kathy put forth that there is a loss involved. So either an opportunity missed, or I do think that, and I'd be very curious to pursue that regret is more about opportunities missed than it is about behaviors. And I'm about to use the word regret, that we regret demonstrating, whatever. Yeah. So that's where I'm at. I'm trying to figure out, is regret something totally unique? So let's play the little game of put regret in different places on the change grid and tell me if you think it really is likely to happen. So let's start with very far out grid. Now, what do we know about the person in the out-grid danger zone? We know that they are a gambler to a certain degree. Yes, up-grid people might also gamble, but these people are gambling because they want to win, and they believe that they've got the ability to work the odds, to beat the house. They might actually be grandiose enough to think that the odds are always in their favor, and that they've, born with a silver spoon. Choose whatever description you really want. But there's a lot of that arrogance that's occurring in the outgrid danger zone. So does it feel very likely to you that someone who is in an outgrid danger zone would experience regret? And if so, would they experience it while they're in the outgrid danger zone, or is that likely to come at some point after the fact? All right, let's see where you go.
I would say no. They don't.
Yeah, I would say no.
No.
They don't regret.
Certainly not while they're in the danger zone.
Certainly not, because I think that what they have a tendency to do in any kind of a loss, a situation where they lost, which they can't stand doing, their narcissistic tendencies prevent that, is that they need to find somebody to blame. Because again, they made the decision based on the information they had. So someone else coulda, shoulda, woulda given them different information, better information, whatever information, then they would have made the right decision. So they can't really take responsibility, or that's not fair to say. They are less likely to take responsibility and more likely to blame. Would you guys agree with that or disagree with that?
Definitely blame.
Yeah. Now, is that blaming of others simply masking regret they're actually feeling, but are choosing to deny or not to outwardly share? Maybe, maybe. Because I do believe the most fragile person on the change grid is the outgrid danger zone.
That's a good point, T, because I think those people they blame, it's either because they were drunk, it's not always another person,
There you are.
but a reason. But what was I going to say? They blame. Oh shoot! I'm just thinking someone took a pillow, and I caught him at it, and she was sorry, but she was drunk. Okay, was she drunk for 10 days? Maybe she could have returned the pillow once she sobered up. But I was going to make a point. Oh dang it! I'll think of it later. I don't want to.
Okay, yeah. So it's in there.
Well, let me comment here. Let me pick up on I think what Edie might have been saying. Because it's outgrid, it's an attack. It's an attack. It's you're putting energy out there. You're throwing energy at something, and so you are less likely then. I mean, that's why it ends up blaming, because you are pushing away from your center and pushing out into the world. That's how I see that quadrant.
Yeah.
And don't you think that's their major defense mechanism, that it's a defense mechanism so strong, and they've lived with it so long, they're living in a delusional state. Do you agree with that? Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we often talk about that the outgrid danger zone is the home of, a textbook narcissist. So they can't acknowledge that they're responsible for anything other than the glory that is them. And I also think that they are either setting themselves up for the grand win. And if they can't get the grand win, they're not going to revert into wallowing and all that. That's just like that. That's, how do I say this? If this is their personality, or a literal organic problem that they're dealing with, then they don't have that awareness available to them to take responsibility. I don't think they're avoiding taking it. I think it doesn't occur to them to take it. Thoughts about that? I think they genuinely believe that it's somebody else's fault.
Yep, I would agree.
Yeah. They just don't have that level of introspection. So if we don't want to be in the outgrid danger zone, I just want to go over here along the heart line. What about an amiable driver? An amiable driver certainly still believes himself as having a good level of ability and is tackling a reasonable sort of a challenge. And so if they are in a situation that didn't turn out the way they wanted it to, how's the amiable driver energy likely to experience and express regret?
Because that's more about the amiable piece is more about relationships.
Yep.
There's going to be less blame, I think, and more how can I manage this so that the relationships remain intact, and what do I regret? Perhaps the loss of a relationship.
Exactly. And so what are they likely to do? Rather than blame others, what might they be more likely to do?
They might blame themselves.
Blame themselves, right? Or look for it, at least what part of it is their responsibility. And then I think their behavior is more likely one that'll go out and try to heal the relationships, mend what's broken. I think they're going to really use it as a learning experience. Certainly far more than an outgrid danger zone person would. What about an analytical driver? Same scenario has occurred, they lost.
They probably spend all their time trying to figure it out.
Yeah, they're kind of going like, well, we did what we did because we thought it was an informed decision. We thought we did our due diligence.
Had all that ability.
Right. I mean, we got, come on. So it's like, we're not clueless. What did we miss? So what is this little missing factoid, missing piece of information, awareness, whatever it is, that could very well have changed things? So they too are going to use it as a learning experience, and focus more on structural elements than relationship sorts of elements.
Yep.
Does that resonate?
Yep.
Yeah, definitely.
How about an expressive driver? Again, the same issue occurred. They lost whatever they were supposed to they wanted to win.
They
Well,
haven't given up yet.
haven't given up yet, right? That upgrade energy tells me that everything is still possible. We just gotta stay with it, get in there, do whatever we can do. I mean, they're more likely to become the cheerleader. And let's say, it was a sporting event or whatever, and they lost the game. You can't go back and play the game again. But that expressive driver energy would want to have people celebrate the successes, stay focused on what was really going on. Hopefully there's some sort of other person on the training team who is serving as the analytical driver and really going like, people aside, winning a game or whatever is about decisions that are made and actions that are taken. So what decisions were made based on what information, what actions were taken based on those decisions. So I kind of need someone to do the analysis, but I also need someone to keep the energy level and the enthusiasm and all that a bit higher. Meanwhile, the amiable driver is healing the relationships. And so when it comes to having a regret, we've already said that the driven driver tends to deny it. Well, do you think these three types, the analytical driver, the amiable driver, and the expressive driver, do you think they're going to experience something you would label or they might label as regret in such a situation? So they lost the deal, they lost the game, whatever it is. They lost.
I kind of think the amiable driver would be the spot where that might occur. I can't see it in the expressive or the analytical.
I disagree with that. I think let me just say why. It's a different kind of regret. It's still with the analytical. It's a regret. I mean, I'm not seeing regret as this deep
right.
guilt or whatever. It can be deep grief. It can become deep grief.
Sure.
But if you think of it as I regret having missed something, I regret having missed the data, I regret having, I think there is some element of regret all around within that green circle area, within those quadrants. Somewhere it's just expressed differently.
Yeah, and so the person who's the analytical driver spot of the change grid might be going like, I can't believe we missed that, or I can't believe we didn't look at XYZ. Where this person is more regretting about how people were impacted by it and all that. And this person does an expressive driver regret things.
I don't think they do.
I don't know that they do. And if they do, they keep it in the back of their head as kind of like a motivator to get everyone else inspired and focused on positive outcomes. But I don't really think they regret. That's interesting. Others on the call, what do you think? Does that expressive energy counteract regret?
No, the expressive just won't give up.
The expressive energy, the expressive driver energy will
won't give up.
You're right. Yeah. But they're going to try to move things forward by, if anything, I would say they might be the one who says, there's no point in looking about what we did wrong or dwelling on what we did wrong. We just need to learn from it and do more of the right things next time we have an opportunity. So I think they're talking a little bit more about possibilities. Yeah. Yeah. So they know it, they're intelligent people, but they don't do that. Where this person out here, this is just pure denial, pure denial. Now, it is possible that someone could be at coordinates 10, 10. I don't want to lump all driven drivers into this negative narcissistic space. but it's this 10-10 spot where you get the leader who is basically saying, I know that I'm the one in charge. I freely choose to be here. I have to lead people very, very well. I have to work with all these. I mean, but it's on me. It's on my shoulders, and I'm the quarterback running the play, if you will. So their big danger, and the danger, in fact, if you look at any kind of highly paid sports figure, they started out as a driven driver, and then they got a little full of themselves, So they started out as a healthy, driven driver, determined to accomplish X, Y, Z, and suddenly they believe their own PR. So that's the danger. They're at a very vulnerable spot right there that they don't want to come over here. A little dose of humility. It's all they need, all they need. So I think that person might say, well, then let's deal with this head on. Sure, we regret doing it. Let's get in there and fix it now. Now, I need the analytical driver to tell me how to fix it, maybe. And I need the amiable driver to make sure everybody's okay with doing whatever we need to fix. And I need my visionary cheerleader up here to kind of help that whole thing. So I need these energies to be present. But there you go. That's how different spots on the outgrid quadrant at least would handle regret.
You know what, T, isn't all of the regret really on a continuum? I mean, where it can lead to or be deep pain and grief, or it can be, gee, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? Is it on a continuum?
Well, I think it's on a kind of a continuum, but I don't think it is a line. I'll go ahead and jump in there and say, I believe it's a radial trend that regret is very much pronounced as you move outgrid. It gets increasingly pronounced as you move outgrid, and it is in the in-grid section where regret becomes a simple corrective technique or very much a positive learning experience. And in the middle of the change grid, I would say you're free of regret. Mostly it's because in the center of the change grid, you're just detached. It's tough to regret something and be detached at the same time. So if I'm going to regret, I have to step off, go somewhere to kind of do that. So in fact, let's go ahead and take a look down grid and see if that also occurs. So how do I say this? I would say to you that the person who's most likely to own the regret is going to be between the green circle and the red circle. Yeah. All right. We'll have to play with that just to see where it all goes. But to Edie's point, I do believe it's on a continuum, but I believe the continuum is a radial trend emanating from the center. So let's go down grid. Now, think about something has happened. So let's say that what's happened is somebody has a problem with a vehicle. So there it is, problem with a vehicle. Well, how do you think someone who's an analytical is going to handle that? Remember, they're deep down in apathy. If we look at the engagement rings, we know that they are hypo-aware. So what do you think? Is this a place where someone is likely to experience regret?
I don't think so. I think they're clueless.
Clueless, yeah. Yeah, yep. Generally, when I think of clueless, I think of low perceived ability. And
yeah,
these
that's
people
true.
have more high ability. But nevertheless, what's the difference between clueless and
Unaware.
Well, we talk about down in apathy, people have an illusion of control.
Right.
So maybe that's what's really going on, is their illusion is becoming increasingly delusional. Kathy, what were you going to say?
I don't mean to unmute and just sort of
Oh,
babble
no,
here,
no,
but
please do. Join the club.
you look at it, the challenge is high, the challenge is low, and the ability is high, and part of me thinks that individual, I don't know, I can't articulate. I have a feeling that they would regret there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to think of what it would look like.
Kathy, would they blame themselves or would they blame the circumstances?
I think they would probably blame the circumstances.
Mhm. Yeah.
I don't know, but I think if you think about it and you think about that's the place where I think the people are going to come closest to suicide.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, that that they might blame themselves, and that they might actually. Well, let me see if I can say this. That they might actually see through their own delusion at that point.
Right. Yeah, remember, this is where depression lives. And
Yeah.
so they're bored, complacent, ambivalent. When I think about regret per se, I don't think this person would be one to talk about their regrets or openly express their regrets. But I would also not be surprised to find out that regret is a governing theme in their psychological life.
Yeah, that's how I see it too. I mean, I think that's the place where that's going to happen. The guy who committed suicide is probably living somewhere there
Yep.
because they're looking at facts and they're saying, I should have known that.
Right.
And their ego is based on, making a mistake. I mean, think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
made a big mistake and I should have known better, and
Right.
how hard that would hit them if they're in that space.
Yep. Yep. It's also difficult for people this spot on the change grid or with this personality type, allowing for that as a possibility. It's difficult for them to reach out to others because
Key, has any work been done on where people are on the grid when they are suicidal? I mean, there's a tendency.
yeah, it actually ends up being in all four quadrants, all four danger zones. When it all comes together, suicide occurs on the dark side of the change grid. It all depends or is revealed perhaps by the mode that they chose to in their life. So for example, you can imagine if you are in the outgrid danger zone and you end up for whatever, remember all the danger zones are physically adjacent to one another. So you've had some stressed out moment and you've had some depression and despondency and you feel like the victim yourself. All this stuff is happening in a very fluid kind of a way. But if you decide to take your life and you are coming to that decision from the outgrid danger zone, what modality might you choose?
That makes sense.
Physical.
You probably jump out of a plane, you crash your car into a tree, or something like that.
Right,
Shoot yourself.
something dramatic. Right. Where if I'm downgrid, what might I end up doing?
Oxycodone.
Yeah, I might end up taking pills.
Fentanyl.
Yes, whatever's handy. There you go. Yeah.
And Ingrid would probably take pills too, right?
Well, Ingrid would take pills and alcohol. This is what we always saw as the combination there. Pills and alcohol. I mean, you could take a whole bottle of Valium and be just fine. But if you take even a handful of Valium and have alcohol with it, you're a goner. When I worked at Poison Control, that was the one thing that we always had to help the ER staff with, because in medical school, you're not taught how to deal with suicidal decision-making. And at Poison Control, we are, because the vast majority of phone calls that come into Poison Control after midnight are suicide related. Because the call always begins like this: what would happen if someone took blah, blah, blah? And we were trained to immediately say, did someone take blah, blah, blah?
Interesting.
We're not the suicide assistance center. So anyway, not going to help you. But and then we would always tell them that, well, yes, that would kill you, but that would be an excruciating way to go. And so our training was to paint as horrific a picture as possible of whatever mode of suicide they have available to them. Oh, by the way, and it might not work. So you'd say to them, well, you're going to be in agony and you're going to have this and this and this, and said, and the chances of it actually working are pretty slim. So it was great fun, the psychology of suicide prevention. Anyway, so I can certainly see that someone who's downgraded may, from their depression, commit suicide. They tend to use whatever's handy. Where someone who's upgrid may very well do it, but upgrid is going to do something that you go, well, why would you do something that was so definitive, so whatever, to me, these are the gunshots or the hangings. So, yeah, well, it'd be interesting. As you guys can imagine, over the course of the years, we've had literally hundreds of people have been certified in ChangeWorks and have been licensed for, a period or more, whatever it is. We've had every situation you can possibly imagine. It should not surprise you that we have had our human development professionals themselves commit suicide. We've had them have a spouse commit suicide or a child in their life commit suicide. It's amazing how, when you do the kind of work that Linda and I have been doing for as long as we've been doing it, the stories that you hear from people, and you always wonder, it's like, when you're a human development professional, you should be aware enough and equipped enough to understand things that the common individual would not necessarily understand, and you should be able to have a whole pool of resources you can turn to. But we're, I don't think that that's, a guarantee of much of anything. If someone reaches that dark spot, they reach that dark spot. So, but yeah, very sad. Okay, anywho, it's top of the hour. I am kind of curious to continue this discussion if you guys would like to. So we'll stick with this for next week's Tuesday call. But Thursday, I want to start a new series, but I want time to be able to really promote it. I'd like to get some more people involved in the circle. And so I thought we'd do a little blast inviting everybody to come to it. So we're going to start a brand new subject next week, Thursday, so we got time to promote it. But I'd like to finish up our discussion on regret.
Thank you. This is a great discussion. Thank you. And,
Yeah, you're welcome. I just love that. Here I am on a drive, and there's the subject, like regret. Who knew that regret psychology was a thing?
Yeah.
So there it is. Okay, anyway, thanks everybody.
Bye-bye.
Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.
Bye now.